Today I'm going to show you how to properly import SkeletalMesh into NRG and append action to it. So later on you can use an animation controller to blend those animation, and in combination with an armature asset you can create skeletal mask to create additive blending. I'm going to jump over to Mixamo, and with my default XBot selected and an animation, I'm simply going to click the download to get the FBX. Once I got the FBX, I jump over into Blender and import it. File, import, FBX on my desktop, and let's start with the idle animation. Once my XBot is imported, I'm simply going to join the mesh since it's easier to deal with. Also, it's pretty dense, so I'm going to run a decimate modifier. 0.1 should do it. And apply. For my initial export, I am both going to select the skeleton itself and the mesh, but later on I only want to export the animation. Before exporting into Kaleda, I also going to change the range of frame that will be exported. Under output properties, I'm going to select that the range is from 1 to, in this case, 201. Like this, I'm not going to end up with not enough frame or too many frames to deal with. Next, I'm going to go under File, Export Kaleda, and again on my desktop, I'm going to overwrite my xbot.dae. Export. Back in the NRG editor, with my library selected, I'm going to go under Asset, Import, and Desktop, and my xbot. Open. For the initial import, I am going to keep the geometry. I will not use materials for this demonstration. Animation, of course. Ensure that no other object is currently selected because we are going to import the initial skeletal mesh. Skeletons. And in visual scene, I'm going to import the object and place it on my first render layer. I'm also going to toggle that off to ensure that all the assets are placed at the root of my project. Import. And I'm going to jump on my viewport and click Shift 1 to edit my first render layer, then Tab to switch to wireframe, and select our XBot. I'm going to pop a timeline editor. With my XBot selected, I can see that in timeline, I have my first action imported. As you can see, the frames are pretty dense. Under the dialog, the Kaleda dialog import, the animation tab have a few controls that allow you to tweak to ensure that only the amount of frame that matters are imported. By default, it is set to be non-destructive, so your animation will be imported in its integrity. But with a bit of tweaking, you can drastically reduce the amount of frame and even eradicate some of the channels that are not actually moving any bone. So I am going to set the state to play, and I'm going to push spacebar. And as you can see, my idle animation is now running. Now the next step will be to append an action, another action, this one, so we can then start blending using an action controller. I'm going to push here to make sure that this one stops, and I'm going to go back into Blender, move my guy a bit, select the skeleton and move it, and I'm going to go under File, Import, FBX, and this time I'm going to load another animation. This time my animation frame is 104, so I'm going to input 104 here, since I only want the range, that range, and I'm going to also select my skeleton and my mesh just for demonstration purposes, and I'm going to go on File, Export, and Kaleda, and I'm going to click Selection Only and overwrite my XBot. Back into the NRG editor, ensure that my XBot is actually selected. Under Library, Asset, Import, XBot again, Open, and this time I will not need the geometry. I will not need the materials. I will not need the skeleton. I will only keep the animation, and I will append the animation, creating an action, to the current selected object, which is my XBot. Here are the parameters that I could tweak to reduce the amount of frame rate. And under visual scene, I'm going to uncheck everything, since I don't want to create no new object. I already have one. I'm only looking forward to append the existing animation, the animation that is coming from my Skeletal file, to my existing XBot. I'm going to click import again, and timeline. You can see that now I have two very different action connected to my skeletal mesh here. With my second action selected, which is the capoeira action, I'm going to select the state is play, and this time with the timeline selected, if I hit the space bar, you can see that the other action is running. And this is how you are importing skeletal mesh and action to later on use action controller to blend those actions together, and using a armature asset that will create a skeletal mask. You can also do additive blending.